If you've watched any videos on this channel, you likely have come to discover that I find identity politics oftentimes to be incredibly ridiculous, incredibly reductive, and incredibly bad for society. Now, we do have fun making fun of identity politics on this channel. We do talk about the more insane expressions of it. Perfect example of this is in a recent video. We talked about that Vice panel on feminism, where you had 7 crazy leftist feminists who could not even engage in a conversation because they kept incorporating their identity subgroups into the topic, thus making Sydney and Pearl look like the only 2 sane individuals in the building, and we all enjoyed that.
Barriers. I want to know what barriers in the U.S. today as a woman.
Well, as a woman or as a woman of color? Let's be specific.
As a woman. I said as a woman.
Well, no, I can't answer as a woman.
I just feel like your question.
But the thing is, in that scenario, that's all fun and games. We all get to laugh at it. And then we see Vice, the petty company that it is, do a copyright claim against just Sydney Watson, not any of the other creators who made videos about that because they're petty. And one of the panelists, the cackling harpy, if you remember this person.
So yeah, of course, it's frustrating because when we try to talk about it, we get shouted down, we get told.
Claimed that Sydney and Pearl disagreeing with her on this panel was actual violence inflicted upon her. That's the petty response that you would expect from Vice. And that's a real consequence, and I think you should support Sydney, and you should deal with Vice and condemn them for using the copyright system in such a way to back up such an insane person. But the thing is, the story we're going to talk about today is so far beyond that. It's so insane. It's so ridiculous because it involves people rallying around somebody who is a convicted murderer of a woman, and trying to get this person out of jail because now this person identifies as a transgender. Now, this person grew their hair out, may or may not have taken some hormones in prison, and for some reason, we're supposed to overlook the brutal rape and murder, not necessarily in that order, of an innocent woman who just tried to get away from her abusive ex-boyfriend, aka the person that is being venerated by members of Congress and by the left-wing media. That's what we're going to get into today. That's what we're going to talk about. But before we get into that, this video is sponsored, so let me chuck it to the sponsor, but be sure to come back over here because it's an important story that we're going to talk about on the other side. A new survey shows that about half of all Americans have weight loss as their New Year's resolution. Well, considering you're not alone, maybe you should consider doing something that has worked for thousands of people nationwide. And of course, I'm talking about this amazing keto powder over at Keto with Justice. There's a reason why the keto diet has become so popular nationwide. It's because it does work for a lot of people. In fact, my own mother is on the keto diet, and this powder can help prolong a state of ketosis, thus making it so that you don't have to be so rigid in your dietary plans. And luckily for you, for your New Year's resolution, this is available for 51% off at KetoWithJustice.com. That's KetoWithJustice.com. Let me say it again, KetoWithJustice.com. So if you've seen any of the coverage of this news story, which by the way was popular about a week ago leading up to the execution date, the headline read something to this effect. The state of Missouri is going to execute the first ever in the nation openly transgender person to be executed in the United States of America. First transgender openly to be executed in the USA, or something to that effect. And it's not just the local news, it's not just the national news, it's actually members of Congress. Now, they're lowly members of Congress, we're talking about Cori Bush, but each and every one of these people got on board with the talking points that this person needed to be freed because they were a transgender person being executed, and it was the first transgender person, real trailblazer in that regard, to ever be put to death in the United States of America.
Almost 2 decades ago, Beverly Gunther was raped and stabbed to death by her ex-partner, Amber McLaughlin.
Now, Representative Cori Bush has a long history of being pro-criminal and being incredibly dishonest in her activism. A perfect example of this is the reason why she's in Congress. She'll often tout her activism in Ferguson post the shooting death of Michael Brown. Now, what she won't tell you, because she pushes the lie that Michael Brown was murdered by the evil white racist cop Officer Darren Wilson, is that all of the evidence shows that Officer Darren Wilson told the truth, his use of force was 100% within the confines of the law, and Michael Brown was attacking him, didn't have his hands up. The whole thing in Ferguson was a myth. I will link the Department of Justice report. You only have to get through the first 8 pages. I've talked about this a million times on this channel in the description box if you want to read that. So she already started off lying about a criminal case. She already started off being pro-criminal in that incident in order to benefit her politically, so it is unsurprising that she has decided to get behind the first openly transgender person to ever be executed in the United States of America. Also, it's in Missouri. That is the state where Cori Bush is a congresswoman, so it all seems to line up. The stars are all in alignment. 3 days into 2023, Missouri has chosen to uphold violence over mercy. Today, the state executed Amber McLaughlin, a trans woman who was sentenced to death by a judge after a jury could not unanimously agree to impose that sentence. Capital punishment must be abolished. Now here's the thing. You can be anti-death penalty. That's totally fine. You could even want a system where the jury has to be unanimous in the sentencing. You know, they have to do the conviction and then they vote on the sentencing of that person. However, that does lead to awkward scenarios like what happened in the famous Parkland case where you have a guy who killed 19 people, most of them school children, in a school shooting, who ended up getting spared from the death penalty because Florida required a unanimous verdict, and one person out of the 12 jurors decided that they weren't going to vote to execute this person. In my mind, you kill 19 people, you deserve the chair. I don't think it's ambiguous or anything like that. My reservations related to the death penalty are all about the potential for killing the wrong person, because that can't be undone. However, that is not what was brought up in this case. Obviously, you have the anti-death penalty stuff right there in the tweet. But the thing that was brought up was the fact that Amber McLaughlin was a transgender, the first openly transgender person to ever be put to death in the United States. But to transgender, Amber McLaughlin was being put to death transgender. Now you would think, based on this tweet, based on all of the news coverage from the left-wing media, 100% of their headlines, that Amber was being executed due to the fact that Amber identifies now as a transgender, that the state of Missouri, I don't know if you guys know that, it's kind of near enough to the south for you to call them evil white racists, decided that they wanted to execute this person because they're also transisophobes, because they keep putting the fact that Amber identifies as a transis right now in every single headline. And they also talk about the non-unanimous jury, which again, we talked about that a little bit before. You can feel however you want to feel about that, but the verdict was unanimous. Amber was convicted, then known as Scott McLaughlin, was convicted of the crime that actually got this person on death row. And I think it's important to talk about what that crime actually is, because maybe that would change your opinion on whether or not this person is worth saving. Maybe if you heard what this person did do, you would reconsider whether or not you should identify them as this trailblazer in the transis community. So most of the articles will eventually, in one of the paragraphs, tell you that Amber, then known as Scott McLaughlin, raped and murdered a woman, his ex-girlfriend, called Beverly Gunther. Now that actually doesn't tell the whole tale. In fact, it leaves out the very important sequence of events because it didn't happen the way you would normally think this would happen. But to give you a primer of what was going on, essentially Beverly got out of a divorce. She was in a marriage where she was very unhappy, and then she decided that she needed to separate from her husband and start her own new life. And this woman, who was a homemaker in that original marriage, ended up buying a car, ended up getting a job. She was really living that 2003 career woman kind of lifestyle. But then she met the person who was called Scott McLaughlin at the time, and she started dating this person. And immediately, after leaving a marriage where she did not feel happy, she ended up in an abusive situation where McLaughlin was beating her repeatedly. Now, eventually, Beverly, who did not want to end up in another toxic relationship, attempted to break it off with McLaughlin, and McLaughlin ended up responding by stalking, burglarizing, and continually harassing this woman. And it got to the point where Beverly had enough. She ended up trying to get her family involved, but eventually she had to take that next step, stand up to this guy, and go to court and file for a restraining order and try to get this person to back off through the legal system. However, McLaughlin had a bit of a different idea about how relationships should go, so the stalking ended up continuing, the harassment ended up continuing, which, by the way, since we're talking about this, and since it actually says in the article that I'm referencing that McLaughlin was the first woman to be executed in the state of Missouri since the 1950s, This is all very unladylike behavior, if I do say so myself. This sounds like jealous ex-boyfriend stuff, but it's weird because I'm told that this is a stunning and brave, beautiful transes woman, and we should all accept that and spare this person the death penalty, because right now, they grew out their hair and all that, and therefore, we should spare this person.
The victim's neighbor says Gunther was in fear of her ex.
It was just too giving, too nice. Her heart was real big, and she had faith. Well, she has faith in everybody. Everyone deserves a chance.
Gunther was about to file another order of protection against McLaughlin when she was abducted from her job in Earth City. Her body was then found in South St. Louis.
It was one of those, if I can't have you, you can't, and nobody can have you kind of things.
Now, to Beverly's credit, she filed the charges, she did all the paperwork, and McLaughlin actually had a court date set for November 21st, 2003 on the stalking charges due to the fact that this person would just not leave this poor girl alone. He would not stop harassing her, not stop threatening her, not stop threatening the people that she worked with, friends, family. Anybody that was in contact with this woman ended up being harassed by McLaughlin. However, unfortunately for Beverly, on November 20th of 2003, he ended up showing up to her job, kidnapping her, and that's where he stabbed and murdered her. Now, it's reported that this is a rape and murder. In fact, you will see, again, in the article, rape and murder. But in reality, this was actually a murder and rape. It was proven in court that after McLaughlin kidnapped and viciously stabbed this woman to death, that's when the sexual assault occurred. That's when he raped her, because he wanted to humiliate her one last time for daring to stand up to him, daring to leave him, daring to break up with him. Again, all very unladylike behavior, if I'm being 100% honest. I think this is the actions of a very jealous ex-boyfriend, but what do I know? I'm not as highly evolved as Cori Bush and all the left-wing media who want to talk about how this is the first openly transes person on death row, first woman to be executed since 1958, also happened to be somebody who raped and murdered a woman. Very, very man-like crime. Now, for those of you who are listening via Spotify or Apple's podcasting platform who can't see what's on the screen, this is actually information from McLaughlin's previous appeal, and one of the ways that they went about defending against the rape charge was that McLaughlin said she was dead when I sexually assaulted her. That was McLaughlin's defense. That's how he thought he was gonna mitigate the charges. Now again, the jury was unanimous in the fact that McLaughlin was guilty of the kidnapping, the stabbing, and the post-kill rape. And by the way, he dumped her body in some ravine because he didn't think she had any value. I mean, she dared to stand up to him, so that's what really pissed this person off. And everything seemed to be set. Obviously, you have your normal insane death penalty appeals until about 2018, when a different transes person ended up winning the right to gender-affirming care in the Missouri penal system. And this subsequently resulted in that transes person's release. And wouldn't you know it, right after that, McLaughlin decided that he was no longer Scott McLaughlin, he was actually Amber McLaughlin. Right after a case that made it so you would be able to go to a female prison in the state of Missouri, and a trans person who won that case ended up being released from prison. All of a sudden, this person who likes to rape, torture, and murder women, torture, murder, then rape women, decided that it would be a good idea to identify as a transes, and then we heard the sad tale about how McLaughlin didn't feel comfortable in their own skin. McLaughlin was wearing women's clothes at age 12, and McLaughlin was actually the real victim. And honestly, I'm going to just let you guys, if you want to go in the description, read through some of this stuff, because it's absolutely sick that this person is being painted as a victim. And by the way, that activist who won the right to put monsters like this in female prisons ended up advocating for McLaughlin's life to be spared so that McLaughlin could go rape and torture and murder women in the women's correctional facility until the end of the natural life that this person would have.
Amber had a difficult childhood and life. has some mental illnesses, some intellectual disabilities.
And this was the game that was being played. I mean, look at how McLaughlin is being painted in the media. McLaughlin's supporters have pointed to prolonged, egregious abuse McLaughlin suffered as a child. McLaughlin had been placed in foster care as a child after being exposed to alcohol in the womb and suffering abuse as a toddler. After a stint in foster care, McLaughlin ended up in a house of horrors, according to attorneys, with her adopted father, a police officer, tasing her and using his nightstick on her. He also routinely locked the house's refrigerator and cabinets to withhold food from children in his care. What a coincidence! This stunning and brave trans was also abused by a cop growing up. And don't forget about the fetal alcohol syndrome. Also, it was made as an argument that McLaughlin's IQ is really low. McLaughlin, incredibly stupid. We can't execute McLaughlin because McLaughlin is so damn stupid that obviously no comprehension of the premeditated actions, the torture, the humiliation, the months of planning, all that stuff, doing it the day before the court date, couldn't possibly understand it. So basically, they're throwing everything at the wall and seeing what sticks. And again, it is not a coincidence that right after an activist won special privileges for inmates that identify as transgender, that this is the path that the seemingly idiotic McLaughlin decided to go down. Never said anything about being a transes before that, but all of a sudden when you get to go to a woman's prison and see the victims that you like torturing so much, and you get a much easier path, and it might get you to skirt the death penalty, all of a sudden, Scott McLaughlin, no more. It's Amber McLaughlin. And by the way, these activists downplaying the crime just get under my skin, so I gotta cut to some local news so you guys can hear a little bit of how this case is being talked about, knowing what you know about the facts of the case.
Say we need to stop state murder. It does not fix anything. It's actually more harmful. There is a punishment. We have a punishment for people who do heinous quote-unquote crimes. It's prison.
So this is one of the things I absolutely can't stand about the anti-death penalty movement, because oftentimes what you find out is that these aren't genuine religious people who are anti-death penalty. These are people who don't care about the victims and want to lie about the cases that they're talking about. Why did this activist just say quote-unquote crime? Are we supposed to presume that there is some ambiguity about whether or not kidnapping your ex-girlfriend after stalking her for months, stabbing her to death, then raping her, then dumping her body like she's trash is a crime? Why would she phrase it that way? It goes to a mindset that these people have, that the criminals are the real victim, that the criminals need to be protected, and that we shouldn't even really address the existence of the victims. Essentially, what they're trying to inflict is what is known as a true death on the victims, which is after you die, when everybody you knew ended up forgetting about you or died themselves. That's what these people are going for, because they don't care about them, they pretend they don't exist, and they claim that these vicious, heinous, indisputable crimes are somehow quote-unquote crimes, and what we need to do with McLaughlin is move McLaughlin to a cushy female prison where he can victimize other people, or quote-unquote victimize other people, because honestly, McLaughlin didn't do nothing. Now look, normally we cover these cases as the fight is going on. Normally we talk about the battle, the back and forth, and we push for justice for the victims. We get rid of the propaganda, cut through the nonsense, and I tell you what actually happened, but this is not one of those cases. This is resolved already. McLaughlin was executed on January 3rd. I think that this video should be coming out on January 6th, the day that our republic fell. Where were you January 6th? I was in a car dealership trying to buy a car when the car dealership man tried to tell me that frame damage wasn't serious damage, but then I looked up and I saw on the TV our republic, no, democracy worldwide, getting frame damage. Where were you January 6th? Where were you January 6th? Where were you? But McLaughlin is gone. Snapped out of existence. Execution went perfectly as planned, and this monster didn't get to skate by, didn't get to avoid justice due to the fact that some people decided that identifying as trans is more important than killing an actual woman. On top of that, people actually got mad after the execution that somebody in the Missouri state government dead-named McLaughlin.
Today, the state of Missouri carried out Scott McLaughlin's sentence as ordered by the Missouri Supreme Court. McLaughlin was convicted and sentenced to death for the 2003 brutal rape and murder of Beverly Gunter.
Let's be clear, McLaughlin, whether you call this person Scott or Amber, is dead. Both of those are dead names. Justice was served. This monster was put in the ground, and no amount of I'm seeing a spiritual person to get baptized 10 minutes before my death sentence, or I'm a transgender as of the time when somebody else was able to skirt a sentence due to making those claims, is going to undo that. It's over. Justice is served. Members of the family were there to witness, and hopefully they get some level of closure from this justice being meted out. Unfortunately, in our system, it takes 20 years to deal with monsters like this. There's endless appeals, endless shenanigans, but I want you guys to be aware of this case. I want you guys to be aware of what's going on, because this person could have easily skirted justice by playing up the transit thing, by playing into identity politics. Because for far too many people in this country, having a stunning and brave revelation about your gender even supersedes stalking, torturing, murdering, then raping a woman. That's where we're at in this country. Be on the lookout for it, not just in death penalty cases, but in other cases, because as I said before, this has been used successfully, even in the state of Missouri, to get somebody out of jail early. But hey, those are just my thoughts. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. If you like this video, show me by leaving a like. You can subscribe for more content. Follow me on all my social media. Support me via the support links in the description box of this video. This has been me talking about somebody who tried to skirt execution by identifying as a trans is. Till next time.